There's something that we've seen called the aquarium mentality, the idea that, hey, I had an aquarium when I was younger, and I've always liked fish, and I like being around the water, and I don't care if I make a lot of money as long as I can feed my family. I'd like to grow fish. I'd like to be an aquaculturist of some sort. So can you help me raise fish in tanks and ponds offshore? And too often what I find from an economic standpoint is that there's almost a blinder effect where people want so bad to do something that they don't necessarily pay close attention to the real economic realities of doing it.
We live in a time where we can eat anything we want any time of the year. But the age of factory farms and genetically modified crops makes it hard to know where your food comes from and what's in it. Where does the fish you eat come from now? And where will it come from in the future? Worldwide, 47% of the seafood consumed by humans comes from aquaculture. Aquaculture, or fish farming, is when fish are grown in controlled environments.
My name is Rusty Freeland. We're in the agriculture and aquaculture business here in South Louisiana. We started in the aquaculture business in 1989 in the catfish business. They've been raising them ever since. We have about 360 water acres, 37 ponds. We currently have 8 ponds drained that we're either raising crawfish or not doing anything with. The catfish business is, you could say, taking a turn for the worse. The high prices of feed have really putting us in a bind on getting things at a profitable level. There are disease problems and, of course, oxygen during the warm weather in the summertime. It's just been a business the last few years. It's really been struggling. Before that, it was a good business to be in. We're hoping things turn around.
5% of our national seafood supply comes from domestic aquaculture, and 80% of domestic aquaculture happens on land with freshwater species.
There's been interest off and on for as long as I can remember, people who were interested in the possibility of conducting some type of aquaculture exercise in the Gulf of Mexico.
That's a mangrove.
At one point we thought the sea was inexhaustible. Well, now we realize that we have exhausted large portions of it.
The seafood consumption goes up each year, and yet we are at maximum sustainable yields in most fisheries. Many of our fisheries are over-harvested. Many of our fisheries are overfished. Some have been depleted, and that we have to meet that demand from some source. Right now, most of it comes from abroad.
83% of the seafood the U.S. consumed last year came from imports. About half that came from aquaculture.
We have no earthly idea where it's grown, how it's grown, what's in the water that's grown in. By at least doing it here under our rules and regulations, we've got a much, much better chance in developing a high quality known product that we don't have otherwise. We're just not going to produce any more from the wild. So you've got to, if we're going to have fish to eat in the future, you're going to have to look toward aquaculture to be able to do that.
That's really good.
You know, the reality of agriculture is it radically changed the face of Europe first, Asia, North America. So when we do farm in the sea, we're converting it from a natural system to an agricultural system. And we'll have to be real careful not to do that in too many places or to do that in places where it causes critical unanticipated damages elsewhere.
The Gulf of Mexico is the first region in the nation to allow fish farms in federal waters. This comes as a result of years of planning by the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. The regional body passed the aquaculture plan in January of 2009, but not everyone was happy about that decision.
A lot of the folks who've been advocating for the fish farms, I think are kind of blinded by is the opportunity to, hey, we're going to all make a lot of money and we're going to feed the nation and it's going to be fantastic, and they swept the concerns underneath the rug.
We're dead set against the concept or the practice or allowing anyone to put offshore aquaculture plants in Louisiana.
I think farms are the kind of thing where you go get a plot of land, you dig holes in the ground, you plant seeds that grow.
It's the beginning of the end. That's what it is. It's the beginning of the fish farm and the end of us.
In September of 2009, the feds okayed the plan, making it law until national guidelines are implemented.
I think the idea and the real kind of unknown here is this offshore open ocean aquaculture. There are so many challenges to doing it safely.
There's a lot of hardware in the Gulf of Mexico, and the oil companies bear a liability for the safety of all that stuff that's offshore. So when an oil well is no longer productive, the current law requires the oil companies remove it at quite considerable expense.
Aquaculture advocates have said, you know, these would be a really great base of operations. There's a living quarters there, there's freshwater tanks for storage, there's energy, natural gas for an offshore mariculture, aquaculture operation. And you only need to look around the world to see these cages floating off, you know, coast of China, Honduras, wherever, Central America, and the mooring systems associated with those cages to say, well, maybe you could use these platforms. There's so many of them, many of which have sort of come to the end of their useful life for petroleum. Could they be used for something else?
One surefire way to minimize the cost is to not remove it. Now, there are pros and cons of leaving oil platforms in place, but it should always be remembered that there is a profit motive to leaving them in place.
You know, we rely in Louisiana on our oil wells. Those are our reefs. Those are the things that attract fish. That's where people fish.
One of the controversial issues about it was that we've set up a restricted zone around them, and that more or less was directed at trying to protect the cages from intrusion by other people.
I'm Captain Renee Rice. I run charter boat, Sharice 4 Charters. Been licensed captain for 25 years. Typical day, we have usually a half a dozen people, never any more because all these boats in this area are six-pack boats. And we take them out to fish. They all want to see the beautiful red snapper naturally. I mean, that's the prohibited fish that everybody loves so much. And of course, you got to have something else to fill the box up since the limits have gotten so strict.
Good fish.
And we try and catch enough fish so that they have something to take home other than a receipt. It kind of justifies the trip. We usually catch a limited snapper, and then we try to catch some amberjack and grouper. The fish farms are going to hurt the charter business and the commercial fishing business both. It's a question of how long it takes before it sets in, and they're going to probably have a mile radius around the outside of it, stay clear zone. So we can't go stick our poles over there in the fenced off area, needless to say. That can't help us. When you cut down the places that you can fish, it means you got to do more running, more riding, more fuel. It costs you more money to operate.
How do you deal with the concerns by recreational fishermen about taking up their fishing spot? Well, I guess I don't buy that argument, and I just think through education you show them how big the footprint will be.
It's speculated that a single fish farm site could use anywhere from 6 to 12 3,000 cubic meter cages. However, the sites have to be twice as big as the cages to allow for rotation. The pink areas are examples of where the fish farms could possibly be located, but the plan says the farms will most likely develop in the central to western Gulf. These areas have more immediate access to deeper water, oil platforms, and fishing ports. And while the plan says traditional fishing grounds will be taken into consideration, many fishermen are worried that this new source of fish will threaten their way of life.
All my life, I've been doing it since, I've been longlining since I was 18 years old. I'm 52 now, so I've had the boat in the Gulf for 20 years. I think it will probably hurt us more than it would help us, the fish farms out there. If they can start fish farming a grouper for $2, where I'm getting $4 to the boat, that's going to cut my price down to $3 at least. So that cuts, that cuts into us. And if they start farming them and they do it productively, in the years to come, it'll be a lot cheaper.
Cajun people have been surviving for years off of the waters down here, and I don't think it's going to last much longer. This is the most fertile fishing grounds in the continental United States, and they want to come here and experiment with us. It don't make sense.
And when all this stuff comes up, I can't help but think with the local shrimper and crabber and fishermen, why are they always the one taking it on the chin and being sacrificed?
Will commercial fishermen be able to cross into this new era of industrial fish farms?
No, I think that the fishing cultures of coastal Louisiana have a lot of pressures right now on them. There's the concern about, Louisiana's coastal wetlands loss. There's the storms that have come through, and because of that coastal wetlands loss, their communities are a lot more vulnerable. So in 2008, 2005, clearly we got hit by huge storms that laid waste to some of these most historic, most productive, kind of fishing communities.
All of us came back with nothing. With nothing.
Lost
Some of
everything.
you lost your boats and everything else. We all came back with nothing, rebuilt everything. And they just gonna come in here and take it all from us again.
The commercial fishermen are pretty much in the tank now anyway. And I think any other additional competition for a declining resource would probably put them over the top, and we could forget about commercial fishermen in Louisiana.
We all reality. We families. This man got family, kids, grandkids. This man has family, kids. I have grandkids and kids, and they don't actually see what they're really affecting. They are affecting a whole community, a whole way of life. This is the culture. So you're killing a whole culture and more, and communities. And who's going to benefit? One small minor group? Yeah, that's what it's going to be. A big corporation.
I think it's a no-brainer. All it's going to do is hurt us. And everybody in this area is going to do everything we can to try to keep them out.
If I were a fisherman, I'd be concerned also. But then on the other hand, there's a tremendous market out there beyond what we're able to service now.
We do need fish farms, and we do need some exports. We can't supply enough of seafood to feed our country. We know that.
We all can agree on that.
We can agree on that. What I'm saying needs to happen, whether it's a fish farm or an import, it's got to be where everyone can compete. One problem with imports and the fish farming is all of our fishery is seasonal because we're regulated. But if you own the shrimp farm, there's no closed season. Whenever you've got a crop ready, it's going to the market. And most likely you're going to try to put it on the market when we're closed, because you're going to get the best price. And what's going to happen if you put enough on the market before our opening, you'll get the good price, and then when it opens, they won't even need our shrimp. They're flooded.
The issue of compressing market price, that certainly is a valid concern, but the offshore fin fish fishing industry that would harvest fish that might be perceived as competing with aquaculture projects, they're so beat down now, and so regulations are so stringent that they're having a tough time making money. It would be very easy to fold those fishermen, be they coastal or offshore, into a finfish operation. You're going to need people with boats to go out to take care of feeding. You're going to need help harvesting. So I think that through proper education, training, and communication, that would be the labor industry for your offshore fish farm.
No, we don't
Why
see
should you have to? But it's one small group. Why should all these fishermen have to just say, okay, let's just tie up our boats, we're done? Why should all these fishermen have to tie up their boats and be done? But it's one small group to come in and take it. Why should you have to?
We're going to be ready because we're going to go down and fight.
Just depends on what happens to you when it comes in and how hard you work to either adapt and move with it or move on to something else. I don't think it's going to displace jobs. I don't think it's going to displace commercial operations, but it will definitely change things.
It's not like these people are going to go out and do the same type of community approach or community-supported fishery when they're taking a helicopter offshore to give antibiotics and food to a pen full of fishes. And again, the people who do that type of aquaculture are not going to be the 56-year-old crabber. He's not going to be able to be measuring antibiotics and looking at the health of the fishes and scuba diving to keep the pen clean.
They could continue to fish during times that they weren't working on the fish farm to still harvest their crops, but this would be a good source of income for local economies as well as a fishing community.
I have some 50, 60-year-old fishermen. You think that when we go to work for these fish farms that they're going to take care of us? That's crazy. That's plumb ludicrous.
I want to protect our wild fishermen. And I think one of the ways to do that, whereas it doesn't sound that way, when you think about aquaculture, you think it may be taking jobs away. I think right now we do not have enough product to fill the demand at the restaurants and the retails for our species in Louisiana. So we need something to fill that gap, and until we develop our wild fisheries again.
As far as what would happen to a commercial fisherman if there was expansion of aquaculture in the Gulf on those platforms, I think initially it'd be very little impact. The concern is down the road if you saw a really wide-scale expansion.
Nobody's going to ever quit this. Because when it's in your blood, it's in your family, it comes down from generation to generation. We're not going nowhere. And it is like that. They just don't understand that, but it is like that. It's in your heart, it's in your blood. When you go out here, you can't stop going. You just can't say, I'm not going to do something else. You take us out of the water, you take a fish out of the water, what happens to him? He dies. And that's what you're doing. You're killing us. You're killing our culture, you're killing people, you're killing families, you're killing communities.
The cultural impacts of aquaculture in the Gulf are uncertain, but fish farms around the world have had very real environmental impacts.
We look for a better mousetrap first, and then we decide whether or not that mousetrap has environmental implications attached to it.
There's no free lunch, and there's certainly no free fish lunch. So there's going to be impacts. It's just trying to manage those impacts in the most sustainable way.
My biggest concerns with aquaculture, and not just offshore aquaculture, with any aquaculture, is if someone says this is going to be the solution, you should ask them, well, what do these fishes eat? And the answer is always other fishes.
The concern over aquaculture feeds in the last 20 years is a growing focus on the embodied protein, the idea that we tend to be harvesting one fish to feed another fish. And the loss of efficiency there and the environmental impact is the concern that you hear. The idea is, why would we harvest 1 million tons of, let's say, menhaden to produce fish meal to produce 100,000 pounds of red snapper? Why not just eat the menhaden if we could do that? And there are ways to do that, but it's a very non-palatable, oily, not very good fish to eat. All those questions to me are less important than how is the health of the stock that you're using for feed.
There's ongoing debate surrounding the current health of the menhaden stocks in the Gulf. And these small fish, also called pogies, play a vital role in the food chain.
There's a big concern that we have that because of the changes in the ecosystem, whether it's the dead zone, whether it's the loss of wetlands that's happening here in coastal Louisiana, that menhaden very well could be approaching a critical point. So we're really concerned that if you introduce some new market for menhaden, we could quickly reach overfishing point, and even a fishery collapse.
I think that the success in general of the aquaculture industry is going to depend on an alternate source of food. It's going to be either have to come from algae, where we raise algae. We maybe genetically control the algae so it's got the right kind of lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins that fish need to grow. Maybe soybean or land-based biological products will help enhance that food. But I think in the long run, since these large schooling phytoplankton feeders are fixed, that the future of using that in aquaculture is going to be more and more limited.
You can't just feed these things corn or soybeans. These are animals that need other fishes. Removing an ecologically important species like the pogie, you're throwing the whole system off.
Another concern is possible pollution from the fish farms.
Dilution is the solution. Has and continues to be an environmental policy used by countries throughout the world.
Somebody that's going to invest $10 or $15 million in the water is not going to try to do it the wrong way. He's there for the long haul. And I really believe we've got so much water out there and that it's going to be very difficult for it to harm the water that we've got.
The excess food and waste from the cages will enter the surrounding water and could possibly alter the environment.
The other side of the coin is this: if you're running a commercial fishing operation in aquaculture and mariculture, you're not going to overfeed. The idea in mariculture is to transfer that food into a sellable product. So you have this commercial incentive not to, if you will, pollute.
I'd certainly say there'd probably be some input, but those could be addressed by how you sited the location of a net or a cage and how many of them there were. But I really think those issues, in my opinion, are really small compared to the economic question.
And whether in the ocean or in ponds, fish kept at high densities are more susceptible to disease. Many are worried that the farmed fish could spread diseases to wild populations.
And they're going to be bringing those diseases other places, and then all of a sudden, disease that started in a pen off in the Gulf of Mexico shows up in inshore in a redfish, or right here in Lake Pontchartrain.
The chance that wild fish are going to transmit diseases to the farmed fish is much more likely than the other way around. One of the things that I'm working on in my research is the production of vaccines that can be used to vaccinate the fish that are cultured to protect them against certain pathogens.
I don't think that the direct environmental effects will be as significant as the indirect effects.
I'm concerned about genetic contamination if over time we develop what's called the Rhode Island red chicken of aquaculture. You know, it's like if you look at wild chickens and what we're growing now and you and I eat as fried chicken, that's not what the wild ones look like. It's just selective breeding over time has changed the genetics of that. Will that influence, or do we run the risk of that influence in domestic population?
How are you going to ensure the wildlife agencies that you're going to be able to prevent those things from escaping into the wilds? Those are all indirect effects. I mean, it's very hard to measure them. It's very hard to predict them, but those are the real consequences in the long term.
Despite the uncertainty of many of these issues, one thing is certain.
Hurricanes come through the Gulf of Mexico every summer. And the idea that we're going to be able to build an offshore fish farm that's able to withstand a hurricane seems unlikely to me, when we seemingly can't build levees that can withstand a hurricane.
The last 2 or 3 hurricanes that have come by, it's taken platforms that were built for the 100-year storm and twisted them like pretzels, ripped them off the bottom, turned them upside down.
They may put fish farms in and we may not have a serious hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, we hope, for 20 or 25 years. But we also might have one the year they put the farm in. Will there be a big fish kill? Will the fish farm get loose, and will it affect other stocks? I don't know. I really just don't know. We wouldn't know until it happened, I guess.
A storm like Katrina, who's going to survive that? Who knows? But I think these cages have a chance.
These fish are going to get out. They're going to have an impact, and we've got to be ready for it. And we don't see anywhere in the plans where they really are ready for that. It just seems we need to be looking in ways we can control those, control that system a lot better. And 10 miles out offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, there's not going to be a lot of control of that system.
What I see, if Mother Nature don't want that fish farm to survive, she's going to send a hurricane to destroy it.
Can we technically put a cage out there, invest all this money in that technology, have it full of very valuable fish? Is the risk of the storm damaging the crop greater than we're willing to accept? Because if you think about how do we battle this, the technology that's been proposed is we have cages that we can submerge below the wave zone and raise them back up in the water column when the storm passes.
The cost of that structure is going to be not infinitely, but certainly much higher than a low input, just fabric or nylon net cage. What we're talking about is moving a system that has yet to really mature and advance onshore to a highly vulnerable offshore environment.
So I think that you can do aquaculture in a way that answers all of the concerns that we've raised. The problem, though, is that no one's interested in those. That's already been done to some degree, and that hasn't been, they don't see that as the new opportunity. So there's a lot of excitement about this new way of doing aquaculture that's as yet kind of largely untested.
Why try the experiment? Well, I think that we owe it to our coastal communities that are extremely depressed right now. Now, if we test it and it's not economically or technically feasible, at least we tried.
It's two very innate American approaches. It's the people who want to protect their natural resources. They want to be able to go out with their shrimp boat and go get some shrimp and not have Uncle Sam looking over their shoulder. They want to keep their culture. They want to do what their grandfathers did. They want their habitats to remain. They want their lifestyle. They're not imposing on anyone else. They take what they need. On the other side is another very innate American approach. It's like, we're going to do something cool. We're going to use our brains and a little bit of money from the government, and we're going to do something cool that no one else has done before, like land on the moon. So that's where the passion is. Two very patriotic, if that's the right word, approaches, and they're just at other ends of the spectrum.
It's the public's Gulf of Mexico. It's the public's waters. It's the public's wild fisheries that are out there right now. And those are all the things that are going to be jeopardized or could be jeopardized by poorly run private aquaculture facilities.
I think aquaculture has a place in food production in this country. And I think we have a responsibility to try to develop that, but in a sustainable way.
Ideally, you would see 2 or 3 demonstration projects in different environments over the next 5 years, and then a sort of regrouping, reassessment, and then some decisions on what that would look like at an increased scale. And based on those assessments, a more sober decision on whether or not wide-scale permitting should be allowed.
As a researcher, I think that's something that absolutely needs to be done. We hopefully can provide some pretty concrete answers to many of these questions that are being raised.
I think to answer this question about how you get enough fish for the nation, it's got to go back to the fundamentals. There's no technological fix that's going to come in and save the day for us. We need to manage our natural systems better. We need to be, more protective of our wetlands so we can have more robust fisheries. We need to manage those fisheries better so we aren't, depleting them faster than they can reproduce.
The real consequences on an ecosystem scale are long-term, and boy, we're not very good, humans are not very good at thinking long-term.
Why am I a fisherman? Because I was brought up to be a fisherman. Well, when I was 8 years old, my dad, we went out on a boat, and I really liked it. So it's what I enjoy doing. I love it. I'd never want to do another job really besides fishing.
My daddy's daddy did it, and it goes on down. So if it was here for me after 5 generations, guess what? I want to hear after 5 generations when I'm gone. And it can be like that. It can be like that. There's common ground in everything you do. So let's find that common ground. Let's work on it.
While some see this as a collision waiting to happen, others think the needs of the fishermen, the needs of the ecosystem, and the needs of the fish-consuming public can all be met and coexist. But will that scenario involve fish farms in the Gulf of Mexico? We'll have to wait and see.
Even if there's no gasoline on the planet, I know there's going to be some old Cajun out there with a sailboat collecting oysters and crabs.